There used to be a time, and it doesn't seem like that long ago, but now that I think about it, it's been almost 20 years, but there used to be a time when ESPN Radio was the dominant force in sports talk radio. Their morning to afternoon lineup was legendary. Now, I used to listen to Howard Stern in the mornings. I never liked Mike and Mike. Howard Stern was edgy when the show had Artie Lang. It was funny every day. Howard Stern used to lift me up in the mornings when I hated being at my job. I always thought Mike and Mike it was just so vanilla. I always felt like they played it safe. It seemed like they were always careful not to offend anyone. Now, even though they weren't my personal preference, Mike and Mike was extremely popular on ESPN Radio for decades. Following Mike and Mike in the morning was Colin Cowherd. For the longest time, I thought Colin Cowherd was the best in sports radio, and it wasn't even close. I liked Colin Cowherd because he was different. He was an outside-the-box thinker. He found interesting ways to relate sports to real-life scenarios. I often do the same thing here on the channel. I will come up with analogies tying a story in sports to real life. I got that from Colin Cowherd. Now, after him, you had Dan Patrick, a legend in sports talk radio. Doug Gottlieb, he would close out Afternoon Drive. Just think about that lineup for a second. To me, that was the golden age of ESPN Radio. The era following that, it wasn't too bad. Stephen A. Smith, Dan Le Batard, Will Cain. Now, they were nowhere near as good as the golden era, but they still managed to put up respectable ratings. Over the last couple of years, ESPN Radio has experienced a massive decline in both ratings and the quality of programming. Remember when ESPN Radio gave Bomani Jones a sympathy job? They felt like they needed some diversity on radio, since we can see their face through the speakers. Bomani Jones was the lowest rated show in the history of ESPN Radio. This dude sucked so bad, over 100 affiliates dropped ESPN altogether. During 2020 and 2021, executives at ESPN, they blamed their low ratings on radio on the COVID. People just aren't in their cars. They're not listening to the radio like they used to. Well, they sure seem to be listening to WFAN in New York City. New York City, biggest media market in the country. When you're running a national radio platform, you obviously want to succeed in your bigger markets. LA, San Francisco, Chicago. But the crown jewel, the market you want to steal the most, is New York City. For the better part of 20 years, ESPN has struggled in New York. WFAN is the dominant sports station in the market. WFAN dedicated to local teams, while ESPN was catering to a national audience. Now, I don't think anyone expects ESPN to dominate the market in New York City, but they can at least be competitive. I'm looking at these ratings in the New York Post this afternoon. This is absolutely embarrassing. I thought this network called themselves the worldwide leader in sports. Perhaps if they focused on sports, people would be listening. Instead, just like ESPN on television, ESPN Radio in New York is focused on playing in the butt bongo band. Morning Drive on WFAN is hosted by former NFL quarterback Boomer Esiason and some dude named Gio. They're number one in the market with a 9.7 share, meaning almost 10% of the radios in New York City are listening to their show in the mornings. Now, ESPN combats WFAN in the morning with Keyshawn Johnson, Jay Williams, and Max Kellerman. No wonder they're fucking losing. Since last year, I have been wondering where the hell Max Kellerman's been. After Stephen A. Smith pounded his bongo for the final time on Woke Take, I assumed they buried Max Kellerman in the Woke dungeon. This entire time, though, he has been on ESPN Radio in New York, extending his reign as a huge embarrassing failure. ESPN's trio of turds in the morning ranks 15th in the market with a 2.5 share. 15th in the market. You can have a baboon give a radio instructional on how to properly use a banana and draw a 2.5 share in New York City. Now, I know I give Max Kellerman a lot of shit the few times every year we talk about him here on the channel, but Max Kellerman really is a smart dude. I can tolerate him some of the time. When it comes to boxing or the UFC, give me Max Kellerman. He's also very knowledgeable when it comes to the NBA. If I turn on my TV and I see Max Kellerman, I'm not going to automatically change the channel. I can't say the same thing about the insufferable motherfucker on ESPN Radio in the afternoons in New York City. Now, I'm not talking about Michael Kay, who has been on ESPN Radio in New York for 20 years. Michael Kay has never consistently beaten WFAN, but for decades, he remained competitive. Today, his show is absolutely unlistenable, and a lot of that has to do with his insufferable co-host. Afternoon Drive on WFAN features Craig Carton and Evan Roberts. They are number 2 in the market with a 7.5 share. ESPN Radio gives New Yorkers Michael Kay, Don LaGreca, and the intolerable, insufferable Peter Beater Rosenberg. This dude is so annoying the hair on his head fell off just to get the hell away from him. Petey Rosenberg has been on radio in New York since the mid-2000s. It's been at least 15 years. To my knowledge, never had a number 1 show. He co-hosts Ebro in the morning on Hot 97, which is consistently beaten by The Breakfast Club. He was such an obsessive fanboy of fake wrestling, WWE gave him a job talking about the boogeyman getting into an orchestrated fight with the potted plant. This dude's over 40 years old and is still a die-hard fan of a WWE product that is designed to cater to children. Michael KK and Peter Beater draw a 2.9 share in the afternoons, placing them 14th in the market. Dreadful. I mean, it is absolutely dreadful. ESPN Radio is literally dying a slow, painful death in New York City. Last month, ESPN announced that they were making some changes to their lineup in New York. They wanted to steer away from national programming and appeal to the local market. When I read the article, I was expecting to see the announcement that ESPN was parting ways with Petey, but that wasn't the case. I mean, he's not from New York City. He provides zero substance to sports-related conversations. I mean, this fucking guy was a hip-hop radio DJ. What the hell does he know about sports? But for some reason, ESPN is keeping Peter Beater on with Michael Kay so they can finish the job of sinking the rest of the ship. Now, I'm sure most of you are unfamiliar with Peter Rosenberg. Maybe you think I'm being too hard on the guy. Let me show you some examples of what constitutes as sports radio for ESPN Radio in New York. Watch for yourself.
It's, they said that Marquette King got cut, the punter, because of personality. Of course, he stands out because there aren't a ton of black punters in the league, right? And he's someone who was cut from that team. Every decision like that makes you think about it now. Carl Nassib, first openly gay and active NFL player, he's on that team. You know, and this is a guy who referred to Michael Sam as a, quote, queer in an email. Pardon the language. I mean, it's absolutely abhorrent what was being said. It's, and you know what else it does that really is upsetting? And I think we need to process it because, like, we get used to these stories. They come and they go. 2 things. One, there are people who today are reacting to this story over text message and in conversations with the exact same kind of language that Gruden got fired for. Right. They're doing it right now. There are these rich, racist guys looking at each other going, can you believe what happened to Gruden? Now you can't even talk that way anymore. They're angry about it. They feel that it's an attack on their way, that you're not allowed to be hateful. And it really, it puts people in a situation. Stories like this are among the millions of reasons that I think it's really hard for black Americans to ever trust white people.
I just wanted to add that real quick. I had 2 points. I wanted to add that real quick. I knew I was going to be interrupted.
Did you want us to ignore something that we clearly don't agree with? You wanted us to ignore it because you have 2 points.
Fine.
All right, what's the second point? What's your second point? Because your first point was brilliant. What's your second point?
Of course. You guys are liberal. I get it.
Don't you dare say that. Now you don't get a chance to make a second point. You have no idea my political leanings. None. You have absolutely no idea. Hang up on it, Anthony. Because when you're going to be a schmo like that, don't tell me I'm a liberal. You have no idea what I am. None. I have never told you what I was. So take a walk because I don't agree with you. You don't get a second point.
You see what I'm talking about now? Peter Rosenberg has a personality that only a mother can love. This dude is absolutely insufferable. Then you have Michael K. complaining about not being heard when you disagree with someone's political opinion, then immediately hanging up on a guy because he didn't agree with his political opinion. That is ESPN Radio in New York City. This is what they call sports radio. We have went from Mike and Mike to Kiki and Maxie. We went from Colin Cowherd to a fucking Peter beater. Is it any wonder why people in New York City are not listening? And this is not just a problem in New York. ESPN Radio is struggling across the country. Think about something for a second. Before watching this video, when is the last time you heard anything about ESPN Radio? They used to have personalities that generated headlines. Remember when Colin Cowherd pushed his audience to shut down that website? I think it was the Big Lead, maybe? I could be mistaken. But he brought so much traffic to the site, it overwhelmed their servers. They had to shut it down. Dan Patrick would have big interviews that would be talked about in the mainstream media. I'm not a big fan of Dan Batard, but he would often generate controversy. If they're not talking politics, ESPN is forcing their talent to talk about their butt buddies. You think people in New York City really give a shit about LeBron James? You think Greco in Manhattan cares about Tom Brady? No. I've been reading a lot about ESPN over the last week or so. There are rumors going around that Disney could be cutting ties with both ESPN and ABC. Now, they're just rumors at this point, but what does the future of ESPN look like without the financial backing of Disney? Hell, it might be a good thing. Many people think Disney is the reason ESPN has turned into nothing but woke propaganda. But what does this mean for ESPN Plus, which has been lumped in with Disney Plus? What does it mean when the NBA comes up for renewal? It's going to be interesting to see what happens if Disney severs ties with ESPN. All I know for now is what they have been doing the last couple of years on both radio and television ain't working. Their ratings absolutely suck. But give me your thoughts. ESPN Radio completely dominated in New York City. What do you guys think of Peter Rosenberg? I don't understand how this dude has a job in media, especially sports media. It's like ESPN hired some fan off the street, gave him hundreds of thousands of dollars to not draw an audience. He adds absolutely nothing of substance to the Michael K. Show. But let me know what you think. Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.